Welcome to Word on the Block, the series that takes a deeper dive into the blockchain and emerging technology stories that shape our world at the intersection of business, politics, and economy. I'm Forkast.News Editor-in-Chief Angie Lau. Well, once upon a time, proof of work was actually what made the blockchain world go around as consensus mechanism made popular by, as you know, Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin. Developers have been increasingly concerned about the 51% attack, the proof of work's silver bullet. Really, in the early days, it was a theoretical, a hypothetical. Well, in the span of just a couple of months, an attacker has gained more than 50% control of the network's hash rate, and it has prevented other miners from completing blocks. We've seen not one, not two, but three attacks, 51% attacks on one network, and it's Ethereum Classic. And so the question is this the end of proof of work? What is happening with Ethereum Classic? And so joining us right now are the two guys who can address this directly. And we welcome to the show right now, Terry Culver. He is CEO of ETC Labs, and joining alongside him is his partner to chase down these attackers, Cobra and Kim partner, Ben Sauter, one of the leading, I would say, cyber, blockchain, crypto lawyers, legal minds in this space. So Ben, Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angie.
So I got to ask you, what was your reaction for the first attack, the second attack, and then the increasing frustration, no doubt, on the heels of the third attack that just happened recently?
Increasing frustration is definitely the best way to describe it. Proof of work isn't going anywhere. It's only, I think, getting stronger in some blockchains. The issue is there's no easy way to solve it. So you have attackers who are exploiting something that will take some time.
How did you address it the first attack? I mean, this is a critical attack in that this is the underlying vulnerability of Ethereum Classic that now we're seeing is being exploited. How are you addressing it specifically?
Well, it's a vulnerability that all proof of work blockchains have, even Bitcoin and Ethereum. We think that they're secure because of the cost to attack those networks, but the truth is that cost is subjective. The cost to attack one of those networks for a state actor or even a non-state actor is trivial. And in fact, I think those attacks will come. So this is actually a shared problem, is the way we see it. We happen to have been the victim recently, but it's something that I think everybody in the proof of work blockchain world needs to be thinking long and hard about. What we've done is take a series of defensive mining measures to both try to alert ourselves to impending attacks and deploy hash power to prevent them. That's a very difficult thing to do just because of the nature of mining, but we're doing it anyway. We're working very closely with exchanges to tell them to increase their confirmation times. So there's two problems here. One is gaining 51% of the hash power on the network, which allows you to create your own transactions. The other is exchanges, where if their security protocols are not strong enough, an attacker can deposit and withdraw funds very quickly before the exchange can respond to it. So we have to deal with the technical issues on the blockchain, and we have to work closely with exchanges to prevent the attackers from double spending.
It's the multi-prong, you have so many fires on many fronts, and no doubt it must be enormously difficult. But the one thing is the technical ability to address the attack. So defensive mining, you note that you've got to increase the hash rate. How do you do that, especially when you also have a challenge where you are seeing declining hash power at ETC?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. So like the question is, why is the hash rate lower than it usually is? And part of the reason is the growth of other proof of work blockchains that share the same mining algorithm. So it's more profitable for miners to mine Ethereum, for example, than it is to mine Ethereum Classic, which makes Ethereum Classic more vulnerable. And so what we do in the near term is we're working on several solutions, the first of which should be deployed really very soon, which would limit and prevent attacks on the blockchain regardless of the hash rate. How you solve the core problem of low hash rate is something you have to do over time. You know, hash rate is a reflection of the miner's opinion about the future potential of that chain. And it's a reflection of their profitability at present. So we either have to make it more profitable for miners to mine ETC now, and that would require changing monetary policy, and I think something the community is loath to do. Or if we can secure the chain, we can take time to build the ecosystem to a point where miners see that the token will increase in price over time.
And that's not an immediate thing, I get it, but that's certainly part of the strategy. Terry, thanks for sharing it with us. And Ben, as you take a look, and you've been in the space for a while now, and as you take a look at just these bad actors, you know, when you observe just the number of attacks that ETC has experienced, you know, what's your perspective as to what is the motivation? What is the intent? What's the agenda? What are your thoughts there as you put on your police hat?
Yeah, I think in this particular instance, there's really no question that there was malicious intent. And there really was malicious intent, I think, aimed at a few people. There, you know, the exchanges were themselves direct financial victims, because the way these attacks work is once you have control of the blockchain, you're able to effectively send fictitious transactions to the exchange and turn it around and pull out other currencies. And then when the attack ends, you know, those initial transactions to the exchanges aren't recognized, so that the exchanges are actually out, you know, money, and that was a deliberate part of this scheme. It's not a technical issue with the ETC blockchain. It is the result of somebody or some group of people who is trying to commit a fraud, and the exchanges are one victim of that. It may be that someone's deliberately, you know, taking aim at ETC and the entrepreneurial efforts that they're trying to promote as well. So that's part of what we're trying to get to. But in terms of the mindset, it really is somebody who has a bad purpose and is trying to wreak havoc in a few different ways. And our goal is to not let that happen. Terry mentioned the centrality. Excuse me.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Ben. Sorry about that.
Terry mentioned the centrality of the exchanges from a technical perspective, but on the legal side, they're very important as well, in terms of trying to find a private solution to this problem. So on the legal side, we have a few different options, and some of them are private focused, where we try to resolve you know, problems as between actors, and some of them involve going to the government. And by and large, I think this space doesn't want the government to become deeply involved in how the exchanges operate and trying to remedy wrongs. I think the industry as a whole wants to be able to self-regulate and have an environment where the government doesn't need to be in the weeds. But as long as there's not an effective private resolution, it's how problems are going to be solved. And so what we're trying to do is actually work both the private side and the public side. But on the private side, the exchanges are really the linchpin of it, because they should be keeping know your customer information. And they're right at the intersection of where this fraud is happening, and may well know and should know, we think, who's responsible. And so if they get together and help us, help them, and help the industry, they may well have the keys to hold the wrongdoers accountable. And what we want to do is send a message to them that you're not going to get away with this. We're not going to take it sitting down, and we are going to try to figure out who you are. And we have sort of that private way. And then, like I said, there's also ways for us to work with governments around the world to try to get that information to.
But you're right. It's totally a delicate balancing act. You know, philosophically, you know, how much do you want the government to police? You know, compare and contrast to the private industry ability to go after these actors. Now, you point to exchanges. What role do you think exchanges need to play? And I'm hearing you. But what are the things that they're not doing that they should be doing in your view?
So one of the things we would like, and this isn't specific, but this is a general sort of response in my experiences. When something like this happens and we approach exchanges, you actually get a very a range of different responses. But one common response is we're not interested in providing specific details of the transaction or who was involved. And we might respond if a government reaches out to us. So then, you know, what they're trying to do is give you the runaround and make it more difficult and make you go try to, you know, talk with under-resourced governments to send them a subpoena. So one of the things I think the industry really should do to remove a major headwind on the space at large, which is people not wanting to adopt and use cryptocurrencies because they don't think, in some cases justifiably, that there's going to be a remedy in the event something goes wrong. And it might be a fraud, it might be, you know, just something run of the mill going wrong, but a lot of people think they don't have anywhere to turn if that happens. And until exchanges try to help people resolve these problems, there's just a large segment of the market who's not going to enter. And I think exchanges and the industry as a whole needs to find a way to set up a private you know, dispute resolution framework. And it may be giving private lawyers information. It may be, you know, having, you know, arbitration that people can use. There are many different ways, but by and large, it's very hard to get this information out of exchanges. And I think it's a real disservice to the industry.
I mean, who's giving you cooperation right now? Anybody? And, you know, obviously it sounds like it would be good for the entire industry to work in concert against bad actors. But, you know, how do you overcome this current obstacle of not getting the kind of cooperation from exchanges that you need to do your job?
So, like I said, they all have their own different interests. The exchanges who've been victims of this particular attack have been relatively cooperative and have been trying to work because they were, like I said, actual victims of the attack, and they have published some information about it and have identified you know, accounts and transactions that were at issue. So they have been relatively forthcoming. We'd like more, and we're continuing to speak and work with them. So you know, I in particular with a 51% attack where an exchange is a victim, they're maybe more incentivized to help with this than they are in some other cases.
So I guess, Terry, a lot of people are wondering, well, what does this say about proof of work? I mean, is this something that doesn't work anymore? And should there be a transition to proof of stake or something else?
Yeah, I think one reason some people in the blockchain ecosystem have adopted proof of stake is in part because of the security concerns related to proof of work. And in a way, it's endemic. In other words, the attacker used the system in exactly the way it was designed. So the rules of the system are that if you gain 51% of the hash rate, well, then you can write transactions. You know, it's, on the one hand, it's instrumental to building a truly permissionless network, which is a core principle that we stick by. On the other hand, it you know, jeopardizes the entire system. So you have to try to balance those two things. Our view is that even with those security risks, proof of work is still a valuable and important mechanism for building a decentralized, censorship-resistant network. And you know, what we're doing now and what we have to continue to do is find ways to make it more secure. You know, for us, it's not a question of abandoning proof of work, it's a question of innovating so that we can prevent malicious activity and grow the kind of ecosystem we're trying to grow.
And so how do you hope to put this behind you? Do you anticipate more attacks?
I don't, but you never know. I think actually we don't put it behind us. We embrace this head on. You know, look, 3 attacks in 1 month will tell you that security is an issue on Ethereum Classic. And we believe and know that other blockchains get attacked more regularly, maybe with less visibility. It's a universal problem. So we are taking this opportunity to really leading the way in how to build secure proof of work blockchains, even with low hash rate. So if at the end of this, we emerge with solutions that could benefit Ethereum Classic and other chains, then so much the better.
But at the same time, while it, you know, the technical possibility in proof of work may make this possible, it doesn't make it okay. And we are also trying to send a message that just because it's possible doesn't mean you can't do it with malicious intent to defraud exchanges and defraud other people who rely on these blockchains. They're 2 entirely different questions.
What's going to happen if you identify the malicious attackers? Are you going to be pursuing this in court as a private matter, or will authorities, the Justice Department, you know, police, will they be involved as well in your view?
All of those options are on the table, and we are actively pursuing them.
And do you know where they came from? Are they which continent it came from?
We do have some information. I think because the investigation is ongoing, we'd like to not disclose that at that time, but we have been successful so far in gathering some information, and we have other you know, information that we hope to get soon. This industry of renting hash power, which actually is kind of at the center of all this, and computers are getting better. It's just, you know, it's going to keep getting easier and easier to get control of the computer power necessary to do these things.
It's actually a huge vulnerability in the system. So, you know, if you look at exchanges and most service providers in crypto, they've implemented KYC, you know, they're regulated or they have some kind of security systems. You know, the hash rental market is like under a rock somewhere. It's totally anonymous. They're basically money laundering operations. So you could take your BTC from ill-gotten gains, rent hash power, and get out freshly minted tokens with no provenance, and off you go. No one knows you were there. No one cares. It's actually an incredible vulnerability in the system if it wants to mature.
But it sounds like it's already maturing.
Well, the system is maturing, but the hash rental market is actually growing. So think of it like, well, you know, you turn the light on and where do the mice go? They've left the exchanges for the most part, and they've moved into the hash rental market. It's a wild west.
You can see this is public. The hash rental company at the center of, you know, at least 2 of these attacks is called NiceHash, and their co-founder spent a lot of time in jail and is being extradited to the United States right now for computer crimes. And it's just, you know, it's an unsavory crowd.
Is it just the hash rate rental market? Like if you're renting out hash rates, you're a bad actor, and or is there like a valid benefit of renting out hash rates?
I think you need to do it right. I mean, it's a market, and I think folks generally you know, favor market outcomes, and if there's a market for renting, I don't think that itself is a problem. But if you're doing it without keeping track of who your customers are, and doing the same kind of due diligence that the exchanges are doing now, that the rest of you know, responsible actors in the space are doing, so that you're able to trace back these kinds of frauds and hold people accountable when they abuse it. If you're not doing that, then you're a part of the problem, not the solution, I think.
I mean, it sounds like, you know, when you say wild, wild west, you know, it harkens back to the ICO craze. There were benefits of doing that, and then it just got overpopulated by bad projects. And then the response from you know, the SEC, the CFTC, and everybody else was just to, you know, do a blanket wide ban and or really be enormously strict on that. Do
Exactly
you
what you don't
see
want.
that? And do we not want that for renting out hash power?
I don't think so. There is a constructive role to play for hash power. So the rental market is essentially an exchange. You have a miner that has excess capacity, and they'll rent that capacity out to someone who wants to mint tokens. And so the miner, you know, they gain a little profit that's, you know, sort of added on top of what they are, their current capital costs. And you have someone else who doesn't have to make the investment in mining equipment who can gain profit that way. So, you know, it's a legitimate marketplace, but, you know, for a lot of the actors, and not all of them are this way, but for a lot of the actors, it's a totally dark market.
So how do you police that? How do you police that, Ben?
The same way as the rest. I mean, this is the thing. This goes back to, you know, my call for the industry to have a framework for private dispute resolution, because if you don't, the only other choice that the victims of frauds have is to go to the government. And that's what triggered, you know, the SEC and the CFTC in the United States and worldwide, you know, crackdowns or efforts to rein in these kinds of businesses. I don't think the industry wants that. I think the industry would like for the governments to take a hands-off approach, but that's just not going to be a long-term feasible solution if there's also no way, you know, to figure out who is abusing the system. So, you know, from my perspective, it's really no different. It's to call on the folks who have this information to share it with us and help us bring the people who are undermining, you know, the system to account. And if they're not willing to do that, we'll, you know, use the other, you know, means that are available to us. And that, you know, is going through the governments.
Terry, you say that this is growing. Ben, you both say this is a growing problem. What would you say the percentage is right now of bad actors using renting out hash rates, hash power?
It's really hard to say because, you know, you have some miners who are consistent miners, you know, that's their bread and butter. And you have other people who come online briefly and then go back to doing whatever. So it's really hard to say. I wouldn't categorize all miners as one or the other. I think there are actors who are exploiting the system as it's currently constructed for malicious behavior.
And the system depends on miners, so we can't villainize miners, of course. I mean, they're the linchpin of the whole blockchain, but there needs to be a way to hold it accountable.
Well, that is the characteristic of innovation. It does seem like wild, wild west sometimes, but as innovation grows and matures, so too must the industry that supports it. And you know, to your point, Ben, the responsibility is on the entire industry to self-police, to self-modulate, so that the health of the industry is also the trust of the industry. What we'd love to hear as well, Terry, from your view, is where do you go from here? The next year or two, what can we expect from Ethereum Classic, ETC Labs? As you've noted, low hash rate is also indicative of people's confidence of growth. So if you are going to address concerns about growth, where are you leading the company in the next year or two?
It's really about community building. You know, making a case for what utility does this blockchain have? And in our view, you know, we think that there's a very significant role that an Ethereum-based proof of work blockchain has to play, particularly around financial inclusion, and particularly in emerging markets. You know, a lot of blockchains are trying to displace existing and legacy systems in mature markets. And that's important and worthwhile. But our particular view is that blockchain actually could be most useful where people need it most, where you have, you know, huge percentages of the population outside of the formal economy, outside of the financial system, with growing populations, growing urbanization. And, to me, this is where blockchain can play a role. And that's where we see Ethereum Classic playing a role.
But why proof of work? Why not proof of stake? What
Our
is
view,
different about
yeah.
proof of work? Yeah.
Yeah, so proof of work, first of all, we know it works, even with its security flaws. And we think it's truly decentralized. You have trade-offs no matter which system you choose. In our view, proof of stake gives you perhaps a more secure system, but a more centralized system. So while you may not suffer 51% attacks, you could have a network dominated by whales who actually create a truly permissioned network. And so our view is we would rather take the risk and maintain a truly decentralized network than convert to something that might lead to a centralized one.
I hear the vision very clearly, and your pedigree as former UN policy advisor in Africa, Asia, and Latin America really speaks to that. We are seeing a lot of the unbanked and underserved in many of those regions. Where do you envision, what's your goal to serve, obviously the underbanked and ETC labs, role in decentralized finance?
I think our role now in this current phase is to have a network that's secure, that people can have confidence it works. And the other is to really help cultivate and grow projects and enterprises in those markets that can use blockchain in fruitful ways, whether it's around healthcare, whether it's around payment systems, whether it's around sustainable farming, and we're doing all of that. As a second phase, I think it's a matter of making the technology more accessible, so that people understand that it's a form of peer-to-peer payments. Now, peer-to-peer payments exist in emerging markets in the informal economy millions of times a day. So this is simply taking what exists informally and using the blockchain as a way to reduce reliance on trust, reduce counterparty risk, and give access to more people.
There's no doubt that there's an integral and important role. I hear you on even how technology, the architecture, the infrastructure is so critical to true decentralization. The vulnerabilities can either be security or the vulnerabilities can be centralization. So you've made a choice. It's clear, and no doubt it's enormously frustrating, as we started this conversation with. But Ben, I know that you'll be doing your job as you start nailing down who these malicious attackers are. So absolutely keep us briefed on that, and we'll share it with everyone. Terry, I want to thank you. Ben, I want to thank you for joining us on Word on the Block. It was a pleasure to speak with you both today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Angie.
Thanks so much. Great talking to you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this latest episode of Word on the Block. I'm Forkast.News Editor-in-Chief Angie Lau. Until the next time. I really like that one. I hope you did too. That's what we do at Forkast.News. I'm Editor-in-Chief Angie Lau. Click like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe. And here's the next one.